of the Board Game Geek Podcast, where we geek out about board games, the mechanisms behind them, and the people who create them. I'm your host, Candice Harris, and I am really excited to be here today with Paul Grogan from Gaming Rules. How's it going today, Paul?
Going well, thank you very much. It's another gorgeous day in the UK. We've had a bit of a heat wave for the last few weeks, and very exciting. But I've just spent the last 2.5 hours at our wedding venue talking about all of those little details that we need to talk about, because I'm getting married in about 6 weeks' time. So it's a bit nerve-wracking, but that's been the order of the day today.
Oh wow, that's really exciting! Congratulations to you. Today, I actually have some exciting news to share. Besides the fact that I survived my camping trip over the weekend with only about 5 bug bites, I think. But the Board Game Geek Podcast is now being sponsored by the various game studios of Asmodee, such as Days of Wonder, Fantasy Flight Games, Repos Productions, just to name a few. And starting with this episode, each episode will have a short segment where I'll tell everybody about a new board game, which I already love doing anyway. So that's some news on the BGG Podcast front. But today we're going to discuss board games that use dice in clever ways. Some people hate the idea of dice in games because traditionally, you're rolling them, there's a huge luck factor, and not everybody's into that. But lately, I've been really impressed, and I say lately, in the past several years, I've been really impressed with all of the different innovative ways which game designers are starting to use and continuing to use dice that go way beyond the old roll and move games that a lot of us grew up playing.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a love-hate relationship with dice over the years. 20 odd years ago, the idea of dice in games actually scared me. And I don't know if anybody remember, but there used to be a series of cartoon things on Board Game Geek by Barling. And one of them is a Eurogamer stood on a chair pointing at a dice on the floor, terrified, like it was a rat or something. And it's just dice. And that was me. That was absolutely me.
Oh,
but the thing is,
I never saw that.
20 years ago, we could not have had this podcast. We could not have had this discussion, because it is relatively recently that games designers are starting to use dice in clever ways. And the one big important thing for here is the difference between input randomness and output randomness. Now, what you've talked about with the roll and move is the output randomness is you roll the dice, and then the output of the dice determines what actually happens in the game. Whereas a lot of the Euro games are using input randomness. So we roll all of the dice, right, there's the dice. Now let's make decisions based on what we've rolled. But saying that, my taste in games have evolved over the years as well. And if a game is cooperative in nature, then I don't always completely avoid games where there is dice for resolution anymore. And there are certain games which I absolutely love playing, even though they have quite a bit of output randomness, and it's because they're cooperative. Now, if you were to give me those same mechanisms in a competitive game, that's not something that I generally enjoy.
Yeah, that makes sense. When you're kind of working as a team, it's more tolerable than when it can just ruin a competitive game for you, potentially just based on the dice. But yeah, I agree. I've only been in the hobby for 5 years now. And I have definitely noticed a change. I mean, we're going to talk about some of the games in a bit. And one of them came out just as I was kind of getting into the hobby. But we'll get into that. So before we start talking about board games that use dice in clever ways, I'd love to hear what you've been playing lately, Paul. So let's jump into fresh plays.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of games on the list, and one of them I think is worthy of note. It's a game called Princesses of Florence. Now, as you mentioned, you've only been into the hobby for the last 5 years, so you probably won't remember when Princess of Florence first came out. But it was first released in the year 2000. And the reason why I've played it again recently is there's a new version. with updated artwork and updated graphic design.
Cool.
WizKids are publishing the English language version of the new edition. So originally released in the year 2000, designed by Wolfgang Kramer, Richard Ulrich, and Jens Christopher Ulrich. And I have a very, very fond memory of this game. It was possibly the first, and I'm going to do bunny ears now, proper Euro that I played. So it's not the first Euro game that I played, but when I use the term proper Euro, I mean one where we got this game. So this is 23 years ago now. We got this game. We read the rule book. We went, we have absolutely no idea what this game is about. What auction, action, do this, put a piece here? No idea. And it was like so confusing for us back then. Now, 23 years on, I pick up a rule book for a Euro game, I read it, and I go, oh, yeah. I know what we're doing. But back then, we were like, I don't understand any of this. What we do. The rules weren't badly written. The rules weren't confusing. It was just, we didn't understand what we were supposed to be doing in the game.
Gotcha.
The game is absolutely fantastic. I loved it back then. So it's really good to see that we're getting a few of these older games coming back. And the reason why I'm talking about it now is not just because it's a great game, is because they don't seem to make games like this anymore. All of the Euro games that are coming out now, and I love them, don't get me wrong, but going back, and a few months ago, we played Taj Mahal, a Reiner Knizia game from about the year 2000, about the same time. And what struck me after playing Taj Mahal again a few months ago and Princess of Florence recently is these games are relatively simple by modern Euro standards, in that there's no fluff, there's no extra stuff in there. It's all very tight, it's all very condensed, and they just don't seem to make them like this anymore. Maybe because everything's already been done. Maybe because modern designers are like, oh, we're going to put this in, and we're going to put this in, and we're going to put this in. And I think maybe everybody's feeling that they need to keep adding more and more stuff to it to make the game more appealing. I don't know. But yeah, Princess of Florence is just a fantastic game. I mean, it plays over 7 rounds. Each round starts off with an auction phase where everybody will get one thing at the auction. And then there are the player turns where you get to do 2 actions on your turn. And that's it. So you've got 40 actions and you buy 7 things from the auction. So that's 21 things you're doing in the game. And it's so tight and it's so focused and it's just, really, really nice to play.
Awesome. Yeah, I've played Princess of Florence a couple years ago. So I was at a convention and someone kind of discovered I had not played a lot of these like older classic Euros. And my friend Derek was just on a mission. He's like, okay, we got to show you Princess of Florence. We got to show you Macau, St. Petersburg, all sorts of games. And I remember I remember really, really enjoying this. And I'm glad to hear that there's a new version out because there's something special about a good chunk of these older Euro games. Some of them are really special and definitely deserve attention, nowadays still.
And there's one other very special thing about this game. This is the game that taught me what the word orthogonal meant. Because it was in the rule book and I did not know what the word meant. So I went and looked it up and now I use the word multiple times a day. It's like, it's one of my favorite words and I love it. And as a former rulebook writer, I would use the term orthogonal in rulebooks, but every single time I use the word orthogonal in a rulebook, the first time I use it, I put brackets and I say what it means, because I don't want everybody to have the same experience I had 23 years ago reading the Princess of Florence rulebook, where I then had to go to not Google, but whatever we had at the time, maybe a dictionary, and look at what the word meant. So very, very fond memories of the game. And when we played it again just last week, it was like, oh my God, this is still so good.
That's awesome. That's a great feeling. And I'm pretty sure I learned the word orthogonal from some board game as well. I don't remember exactly what game it was, but that's kind of an interesting discussion topic. Like, what games have we learned through learning board games? Or sorry, what words have we learned through learning different board games? Cool. Princess of Florence. I'll take a look. I'll keep an eye out for that new version.
It's coming out. WizKids told me it's coming out. I think Gen Con is going to be the early release. So if you're at Gen Con, you'll be able to find it at the WizKids booth, and then it'll be at retail shortly after that.
Cool. Well, one of the games I recently played is Hamlet, the village building game. This is a Mighty Boards game designed by David Cherkop, who also designed Petrichor, and he's one of the designers of The Pursuit of Happiness, which is a game I played back when I first got into board games and enjoyed. But 1 to 4 players play this. It is a kind of tile laying, pick up and deliver game with some root building, where we're collectively building this village together, all centered around this church that's kind of the end game trigger is we can spend resources to basically build parts of the church. And when the church is built, that means the end of the game is triggered. So I remember last year at Essen, the Mighty Boards booth was always like jam-packed with people picking up this game, demoing this game. So I never even got the chance to demo it back at Essen. And I was always curious about it. I didn't know too much about it, except that it was some kind of village building game. But I recently got the opportunity to try it because I actually interviewed David Cherkop for an episode of Cardboard Creations, which is a series where I interview game designers on like how, getting the backstory on how certain games are created. So anyway, that triggered me to finally get this one to the table. And the really interesting thing, there are tons of tile laying games out there, but this one has like really odd shaped tiles. And on each tile, there's some combination of like, there'll be like paths of roads and then maybe forest in sections or mountains in sections. And the art is really lovely. The iconography can be a bit tiny, hard to read on this one, but I think it's because the odd shape of these tiles, like there, isn't much flexibility for how big you can make icons when you're trying to balance also creating pretty beautiful art and everything. But anyway, you have these basic resources, wood, stone, grain, and they start on the board. And one of the interesting things with this game is that your resources are never like spent. You're not gathering personal resources. They're all communal. And every building that you build as you lay out these different tiles, it's all communal. Anybody can use buildings to kind of create different resources. And the resources stay on the board. And then each player you start the game with just one worker, I think, and one donkey. And, throughout the game, you're going to be trying to get more donkeys and more workers so you could do more stuff. But when you want to either build a building tile or use a building to create a resource, you have to kind of make a network of your donkeys to the worker that's actually doing the work. Think roads and boats. Like this to me felt like a lighter version of roads and boats. And it was just a very like pleasant and puzzly game. But I like the idea of, again, I'm a big fan of roads and boats. And I love having resources on the board that are kind of communal where there's some player interaction. Like I might, line up my donkeys to my worker to create this milk, or I forget the exact name of the resources. But then on your turn, you might be able to make a path to the milk and use that milk to like trade it at the market to get money or victory points. Or maybe you need that to build some other building. But yeah, there's a market of these building tiles. You'll be able to like reserve buildings. And then you can place these different building tiles on the board, and the board ends up looking like very interesting. And then the other thing is like a lot of the different building tiles that they're not all buildings, like it might be like a pond or something, but these different tiles that you place out will score you endgame victory points in some way. Like I had some tile, I forget what it was called, but for every mountain tile that I touched that was connected to it, I got extra points at the end of the game. And then you can build like bridges that let you move into other areas that don't have roads. So it was a really cool game. It surprised me, I think, because I didn't really know what it was about. And probably at the time last year, I don't know if I had played Roads and Boats, but I liked that the turns were really fast and it felt like a very like chill kind of cozy game, but it was still like, there's a logistics puzzle. with how you're building your network of donkeys to different workers. And you're also like, as you get more workers, you're able to trigger more actions and do more things. So, I enjoyed it quite a bit. And I like the player interaction of it where you don't know if somebody is going to use the resources that you need. But yeah, that's Hamlet. Have you tried that one yet, Paul?
I've actually, so I'm friends with David, I'm friends with the designer, and Mighty Boards are one of my clients. I've actually done a sponsored playthrough video for the game. Cool. I'm going to be doing a sponsored playthrough video of the expansion coming out next month. So I'm going to go back to playing it. So I spoke to David about this game the first time I played it. And I said to David, roads and boats. Roads and boats. I like roads and boats. I actually bought myself roads and boats as a retirement present when I left my previous career. And I said to him, obviously this game was inspired by roads and boats. And he went, no, it's not. He said, I didn't really know roads and boats existed when I designed this game. And I'm like, how did you? I mean, you've got, and he did say he changed the transportation things in the game to donkeys after people told him about the similarities in order to basically, it wasn't donkeys before. But yeah, it's, it's a solid game. And yeah, I love pick up and deliver. I love the fact that you have these communal resources. And, you said at the end, you don't know when you create a resource, whether somebody else is then going to use that. You do. They are going to use it. So you go to work in the quarry. And that's the great thing about the game. You say, right, I'm going to go and work in the quarry. You get paid for working in the quarry, but then the stone sits in the quarry. And then another player comes along and goes, oh, right, I'm going to use that stone and I'm going to go over there and build something. And I love that in Roads and Boats. And I love that in this game as well.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing your video on the expansion because he mentioned the expansion to me and I was like, oh, it sounds very interesting. Like it adds some lakes and boats and fish and a couple new things. And I think it sounds like it's going to make the game look even prettier on the table. And also it gives you some more like agency on how you're moving resources. Because I think on the lakes, if you have a boat or something, other players can't cross over the lake, and the lakes fill in gaps because the tiles are such odd shapes in this. You have some interesting gaps to kind of that may develop. But yeah, it's just one of those games where it's going to change from game to game depending on who you're playing with, the way that the different tiles come out, and I enjoy games like that.
So the other thing that we finished last week is our latest Arkham Horror, the card game campaign. So it's a campaign-driven game, and you play. You can play one-off scenarios, but nobody does that. And we've been playing through the Edge of the Earth campaign, which is one that I got when it came out, and have been meaning to get it played. So the Arkham Horror card game. Speaking about games that I love with a high level of output randomness. Now, the Arkham Horror card game does not have dice for resolution, but it does have you drawing a token from the bag of doom. And that token might be good. That token might be, here you go, have an auto fail. And you're like, oh, but because it's a cooperative game, and the fact that the rest of the game is just so utterly fantastic, it is one of the best narrative-driven experiences that I've ever played. I've played 4 or 5 of the Arkham Horror campaigns now, and every single time, the experience of playing it, the way that the story is written, the fact that the entire campaign uses a fail-forward mechanism. So you play a scenario, and then depending on the resolution of that scenario, you then move on to the next scenario. There isn't this, replay it if you fail, and the story evolves in different ways, depending on the choices that you make and everything else. Designed, first released in 2016, arguably, and we can have this discussion another time, 2016 for me was probably the best year ever for the release of board games. So many amazing games came out in that year. Arkham Horror the card game was one of them. Designed by Nate French and MJ Newman, published by Fantasy Flight Games, and 1 to 4 players, but we played this 2-player. So I've done campaigns at 4-player before. This one we did at 2-player. And Edge of the Earth follows on from the original H.P. Lovecraft story, Mountains of Madness, where an expedition goes to Antarctica and finds deleted for spoiler reasons. This is seeing you go back to Antarctica, and it basically follows on from the story in the Mountains of Madness. And yeah, the narrative in this one is a lot more than previous ones. There's a lot more reading out to do, which people warned me about beforehand. But the story is so well written, and just the entire experience of playing through that campaign was just phenomenal. And I have this every single time I play the Arkham Horror card game. I love it, and it's just such an enjoyable experience. And you can't really talk much more about the game because of spoilers, but yeah, it's great.
So I 100% agree with you. So I just got into Arkham Horror, I guess maybe, I don't remember if it was last year, at the beginning of last year. I think so. So I am in the middle of the Edge of the Earth campaign with 4 players. And one of my friends, she ended up starting a job that she's working on weekends. So that kind of put a halt on it, because the 4-player game takes a long time to play, but it's still such an enjoyable experience. And I was just, I had played the Lord of the Rings LCG, a little bit of it before I played Arkham, and I didn't think I was going to love the Arkham theme, but I was just blown away, even with that core box scenario. I was just blown away, or that campaign, that the first campaign, with how creative, the storytelling, the narrative is just what they do with cards, and just the story in that game just blows my mind. And it's definitely one of my favorite games, one of my favorite cooperative games. And I cannot wait to play more of the campaigns, because I think at this point I own them all, at least all of the ones that they reprinted in the new revised format, because that's where I kind of came into it. It's great, and I'm very excited. I might have to hit up my friends and see when we can get a game, because we just love playing.
We'll talk offline about the campaign then. I won't give you any spoilers, but I'm curious to know how far you are through and the choices that you've made.
Okay. Sounds good. That's Arkham Horror, the living card game, Edge of the Earth campaign. Cool. Well, the other game that I played recently is a game that I have been wanting to play forever. And I know it's something, well, not forever, but since it's been out. And I know it's something that I haven't rushed out to go buy, because I know I'm going to get it at some point. I just don't know when I'm going to get to play it. And that game is Skymines. Skymines is a 2022 release from Alexander Pfister and Victor Kobulk. And it's from Deep Print Games and Pegasus Spiel. It plays with 1 to 4 players. And this is a real implementation of Mombasa, which is a game from 2015 that many people might know about if you play heavy Euro games. At some point, I think it came up, how bad the theme was. It wasn't, it was kind of in poor taste, the theme of Mombasa. So I'm glad that they actually re-implemented it with a different theme. Although after playing, I'm I kind of wish it was a different theme. I don't know. But whatever. I love this game. So in Skymines, or Moonbasa, we're investors trying to earn the most crypt coin from mining the moon and investing in companies. If you're already a fan of the mechanisms of Mombasa, you're going to just love Skymines. It changes a few things. So the game board in Skymines is double-sided. One side is pretty much identical to the Mombasa game board. The other side, the map is a bit different. And you also have 2 different types of components that you place out onto the board, the map section of the board. I don't remember what they're called, but something moon mining related, I'm sure. They're also in Skymines, they have different modules you can mix in, and a solo mode, which is also new. And I'm very curious to try all of those modules, but we were let's just, we're all experienced Mombasa players, so we're let's just play the new side of the board and see how it feels. But if you're not familiar with either game, the main game board basically has these 4 tracks around it, these company tracks. And everybody's going to have one of their pieces at the bottom that start at the bottom of these tracks. And throughout the game, you can bump up these tracks, and you'll be able to invest in different companies. And as you get to certain tiers on these tracks, you are basically claiming shares that you'll have in one of these 4 different companies that are played with in the game. And at the end of the game, each company's share value is basically the amount of coins that are revealed for that company, which you'll multiply by the amount of shares that each player has to kind of see what their score is for each company. And the coins, the way that works is each company has these like kind of infrastructure pieces. And as you build these infrastructure pieces out onto the map, it's revealing coins on the board, and that's telling you, hey, this is the value of the company. And there are ways that players can kind of push and pull that by like knocking buildings back to cover up those coins. But it just depends on how players play. But so there's some market manipulation in this game. And then each player has a player board you have these 2 tracks, which in this game, there's like a helium track, I think it is. And then there's like a research track, which used to correspond to the diamond track and the book tracks. And that all like works the same way. And it's a lot to like kind of do everything in this game. So especially if you're new to it, you got to kind of focus on maybe one of those a little bit harder than the other. If you're really good, you can do well at all of them. Not me though. But each round, what I love about this game is each round everybody starts the game with this hand or deck of cards, right? And each round you're going to secretly pick a couple of your cards and place them in slots below your player board face down. And then once everybody's done that, you're saying, these are the cards I'm going to use to take actions this round. You flip them over, and then you're going to start taking actions in turn order until everybody passes. And when you pass, you'll have cards above your player board also. So you'll take 1 slot stacks, put them back into your hand, and then you'll place the cards you had played for the round up into one of the slots above. And that's one of the differences between Skymines and Mombasa. In Mombasa, you used to have to like think really hard about which slot you're placing your cards in, because when you passed, the cards would just go into the slot above whatever slot you put them in to take your actions. And in this game, in Skymines, it doesn't matter. You can discard them to whichever spot you want, just 1 card per slot. But after you reveal your cards, you usually will count up to see how many the total amount of resources that people have on cards. I think there are maybe like 4 different types of resources: minerals, titanium, something and something. But let's say I have a total value of 4 minerals, and I have the most. Like, Paul, you only have 2 minerals, and our other opponent only has 1 mineral card showing. So I can claim what I call Max Banana, which is a throwback to Mombasa. But for each type of resource, you can use a worker and place it to, if you have the max number of that resource, to get some bonus, like bumps on those tracks I was telling you about, the company tracks that you're investing in, if you want to. But if you don't have the max, you can't do that. And sometimes you're tied for the max. So you're waiting until somebody uses one of their cards, flips them over, and then you can claim the max. So there's all sorts of fun stuff you can do with that. But you have discs that are like used for worker placement on some spaces. You have cards that you can just flip over to get resources to buy other cards for your deck. So there's deck building to this. You can also spend energy in this game, which is the other resource. And that's how you're building the different buildings and infrastructure out, which is making the value of each company increase. And you're getting some bonuses from that. You can use like scientists to get these research tiles, which you'll put on your tracks. And then you can like trigger those tracks to like cash in on other bonuses and get more points. And yeah, there's so much going on in this game. I just absolutely love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. It's like the card programming and like hand management is just brilliant. And I love how this is all fused with deck building and worker placement and market manipulation, which I love. Also, like the other thing is like Mombasa, back when I played it and I wasn't like thinking about any themes of games or anything. I was just fascinated by the mechanisms of games. But it's maybe one of 5 games that I've played out of hundreds of games where I got so excited just learning it. Like, I'm pretty sure, Paul, I watched your video to start when I was learning this game. And I just was like, wow, this game is awesome. So then I'm like reading the rule book. I'm like, ooh, this is so cool. And then I went to teach it. I had a 4-player game. I remember this vividly. I went to teach it. And as I'm like just starting to teach, people around the table are like, ooh, like that's interesting. And I'm like, yeah. And I'm getting more excited as I'm teaching them. Then we finally started playing and I'm even more excited. And yeah, I just love this game. I wasn't a big fan of the art of this new version or the components. I wish there were some different color choices, but I get it when you have a lot of components and you're trying to make sure things are, they did a good job with like colorblind friendliness in terms of having shapes for everything as well. But something just made me wish that it was a slightly different theme. Even if it was in the sci-fi space and it was something more like underwater city like or something. I don't know. I think I wish the theme was a little bit different, but I'm just happy to have the game and to play the game. I know you played it before because you made a how to play video.
Well, I did a playthrough video for it. So I didn't do a how to play, but I did a playthrough video. And I'm glad you used the term Max Bananas because I think it was me that came up with that. We still say Max Bananas even though we're playing Skymines.
Yeah.
Now, Mombasa was my number 1 game of 2015.
And
Skymines is 99% the same game. The only difference is, like you mentioned, in Mombasa, you had to decide which columns your cards went in when you were playing them. And that is a great change in Skymines. Other than that, Skymines does have the other side of the board. It also does have the lunar, the AI player, because one of the downsides of Mombasa / Skymines is it's really best with 4. Because of the way that the area control part of the game works with the moving around of the companies, 4 players the best player count. So what they've done is they've done this. It's the lunar which you would use for the solo mode, but actually you can use that to replace a missing player. So you could play 3 players with Luna as the 4th player. And if you actually printed off a second deck of cards, you could play 2-player with 2 Lunar opponents.
Wow. Okay, cool.
Love the game. Absolutely love the game. And just going back to what I was saying earlier on about Princess of Florence, and I said, it's a shame they don't make games like this anymore.
Yeah.
Like, games these days, heavy Euros, are 30 to 35 minutes of explanation, maybe even a little bit more before you start playing.
Yeah.
They are probably, in terms of complexity, 3 times as complex as Princess of Florence. It's not saying it's a bad thing. It's just games have evolved and games are a lot more going on. I am a massive fan of Alexander Pfister. He's one of my favorite designers.
Me too.
I love most of his games. So when I saw Skymines coming out with that was re-implementing Mombasa, very, very happy with it.
Yeah, that's like an insta buy, even though I haven't bought it yet. But I just knew when am I going to get around to playing it? But I know I'm gonna get it. But I'm so glad that I got the opportunity to play it recently. And also, I wish we knew about that Lunar bot thing because we played a 3-player game. And you definitely when you're only playing with 3 players, like one of the company tracks, we barely touch.
That's okay. But it's more, I would be happy to play 3 or 4 players. It's the 2-player mode that I think needs that extra one. And I think it might have even been there as an official suggestion. I'm not sure. But I've done a solo playthrough, as well as the multiplayer playthrough that I did. I've also done a solo playthrough of it where it's just you versus the one AI opponent. And I was expecting it just not to go well. And it actually did. It was fine. It's not the same experience because you don't have as much, I'm going to say, conflict or competition for the control of the different areas on the board. But it still worked.
Cool. Now that is Skymines. Today's episode is sponsored by Plan B Games. Vacation season is here. You may be planning some incredible trips, maybe a cross-country road trip, backpacking in Europe, or relaxing at the beach on a tropical island, or perhaps just a trip to go visit family and friends back in your hometown. If you're anything like me, board games are usually part of those plans, and let's be honest, they're always the first thing on my packing list. But they can be big and bulky. Then it becomes this heavy, puzzly, area control dexterity game trying to fit them in your suitcase. Well, I've got a solution. Azul, the modern classic abstract tile laying game, now has a super cute mini version with mini tiles, a mini box, and even a handy travel bag so you can easily take it anywhere you want to go. Plus, each player board in Azul Mini has a plastic overlay so the tiles stay nice and snug and you don't have to worry about them sliding all around. Head over to your friendly local game store and pick up a copy of Azul Mini and you'll always have a board game ready to take with you on your travels. So, Paul, shall we talk about some board games that use dice in clever ways? As per usual on this podcast, we each picked 5 games. It was kind of hard to narrow down, and then we each have some honorable mentions because there are a ton of games out there that use dice in clever ways.
So 5 games, because I thought it was 20 each. I'm going to have to change.
We're going to be here a while.
We are going to be here a while.
Yeah,
I know. Seriously, as I was thinking about this, when you initially said, I was like, yeah, sure. There's a lot of games that I know that use dice in clever ways. I can pick 5 easily. Nope, I can't. I got my list down to about 20, and then I was like, I don't want to chop any of these off. I really don't. So I'm glad we picked this topic because there are so many games out there that use dice in clever ways. It's become a thing. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I know I have a few honorable mentions. I'll just quickly mention, and then if you have some too, we can, do those. But one of the ones I have, and some of these honorable mentions I've never played, which is part of the reason they're honorable mentions. I'm just like aware of them. But one of them is Scholars of the South Tigris. It is one of the games is it Shem Phillips? Yeah. Those like that batch of games. But in the game, you can basically combine different colored dice to make a new color to take certain actions. So like not only can you use like, I can do this action with red dice, I can do this action with blue dice, but if I want to do this action that needs purple, I need to now combine my red and blue dice to make purple. And I was like, that sounds cool. So I'm looking forward to trying that. I still haven't played Woodcraft. Woodcraft is something about crafting wood, but like the neat thing is that you can split your dice almost like you're splitting a log of wood, and it does something clever with the way that dice are split. Then there's Nokosu dice, which I'm pretty sure I've talked about on the podcast before, but it's a really cool trick-taking game that uses cards and dice, and your different colored dice can be played like cards of the same color. Then there's a game I've only played once, and it's very hard to get. I really want to get it at some point, because after I played it, I was like, I want this game. And then like people are just selling it for like $120. So if anybody's looking to get rid of it for less than $120, hit me up. But it is Quantum, which is this sci-fi, like kind of 4X feeling game that plays in only like about 60 minutes. And the value of your dice, uses some kind of like regular like D6 dice, I believe. But the value of your dice tell you what kind of ship it is. And each ship you're moving around on the board has a different ability depending on the number. So I thought that was like really interesting. Then there's a solo game called Nautilion. And Nautilion does something which is kind of neat, where it's a solitaire roll and move game. But usually, like, again, roll and move, you think of like, Monopoly, sorry, or whatever. But this game, you're playing by yourself and you're rolling 3 dice. And each time you have to decide how you're kind of assigning these 3 dice. Because one is going to like determine how your boat is going to move. One is going to determine how the bad boat is going to move. And then there's some other kind of like bad thing. So you have this really cool decision space of like how you want to allocate those dice. But you're basically racing to get your ship to one end of the board, and then before the bad ship gets to the other side. So it gives you some really cool choices. So that's Nautilion. And then the last one I'll just mention real quick is Role Player. Role Player is a really cool game where you're using dice to kind of build an RPG character. I especially like Role Player with, I think it was called like Monsters and Minions expansion, because then you actually take your character and do something with your character. Whereas the base game, you're just kind of like building up a character and trying to, it's like kind of a puzzly feeling where you're trying to get certain dice colors and attributes to build up your stats and score points that way. So those are a couple honorable mentions I wanted to just mention. How about you, Paul?
I've got the other 15 games that didn't make my top 5. There's a number of Stefan Feld games, another of my favourite designers, Castles of Burgundy, Merlin, Hamburg, which is the reimplementation of Bruges, Amsterdam, which is the reimplementation of Macau. All of those games use dice in a very, very clever way. Pulsar 2849 from Vladimir Suchy and Czech Games Edition. It's dice drafting, but based on the value of the dice that you take, if it is lower than the median value, you gain bonuses. And if it's higher than the median value, you gain penalties. So high dice are better, but if you take a high dice, you're going to get some kind of penalty in another area of the game. And it's those, I mean, I've taught Pulsar 2849 about 200 times to people. And
I have always wanted
it's fantastic. And those bits where you're looking at the dice and you're seeing people go, well, I want to take the 6, but I'm going to get a -4. Oh no, and things like that. So that's great.
Yeah, cool.
Special mention to Alien Frontiers. If Alien Frontiers was not the first game that used dice as workers, then somebody correct me. Somebody leave me a comment or reach out to me, because Alien Frontiers is quite an old game now by modern standards, but I think that might have been one of the first games. Other games on my list, cool. Lorenzo Il Magnifico, Red Cathedral, Grand Austria Hotel, all great games. And I'm also going to mention 4 games now that I've never played. Because when I made a post about this on a Facebook group, I've had over 200 responses, and a lot of them were talking about Sagrada, Blueprints, Dice Forge, and Rise of Tribes. I've not played any of those 4 games, but the general consensus seems to be that they are games that use dice in clever ways.
Yes, and Sagrada I have played, and Sagrada has a similar puzzle to Role Player kind of thing. I just remember them being pretty similar, but like the cool thing about Sagrada is you are like building a stained glass window with these translucent different colored dice,
gorgeous.
And that like I love how that ties in. Sagrada for me, I ended up passing it on to friends who I'm getting into board games. But it was a great game to take to the beach, too, because you don't have to worry about cards blowing away. So these are things us Californians think about. All right, well, let's jump into our list then. We'll start with
so
game.
Number 5 on my list. Now, I spoke about the fact that I was coming on this podcast and the topic that we were going to talk about on my I have a Slack channel for my Patreon supporters. And I said to them, I teased them all, and I said, there is one game I'm going to talk about which none of you are going to guess. Not a single one of you is going to guess that I'm going to talk about this game. And that is because this isn't a board game and I haven't played it. And yet I'm going to talk about it.
I love it.
So this is the Star Wars role-playing game from Fantasy Flight Games. So they've released a few of these. I believe that they all use the same core mechanism, but the different role-playing games are basically set at different times or different parts of the Star Wars universe. So originally released, I think the first one came out in 2012. And the reason why I'm talking about this is way, way, way back. So probably 7 or 8 years ago, I remember borrowing a core rulebook off somebody. I spent 25 years of my life playing role-playing games. I've dropped out of that part of the hobby now. I haven't played any for a very long time. But every so often, I sort of have an inkling to think, I'm going to read a bit of one of the rule books. And as I say, a friend lent me the core rule book for Edge of the Galaxy or whatever it was. I can't remember. And the dice system that it uses to resolve anything from skill checks to attack checks or anything like this uses, as is common for a lot of games from Fantasy Flight Games, custom dice. And these custom dice have multiple icons on one side. So you'll roll a dice and it'll have, there's a dot, there's 2 slashes, and there's a squiggle. what does this mean, right? So there are multiple different symbols on multiple sides of the dice. And when you're trying to do a test or something like this, you're looking for a particular kind of result to see whether you passed or you failed. But then the other icons on the dice give you something extra. And the way that this is done is it's designed to create, to increase creativity and add to the storytelling. So one of the examples, I think, and this is a memory that's stuck in my head, which is why I'm mentioning it now, is it might say, oh, you're trying to open this locked door. Now, in most games, it'll be like, okay, roll some dice, add some numbers. Did you get this? If you did, you've unlocked the door. If you didn't, you failed. But the way that these dice work is that you might roll the dice and you might go, okay, you've succeeded, but look at that little icon there. That's a bad icon. So the games master goes, right, you've opened the door, but the door is now stuck open.
Oh.
Right. So
this.
Basically, the results of these dice inspire the players to add extra storylines. So, you've done the thing, but there's a bad effect, or you failed to do the thing, but there's a good thing that's happened. And I just thought that was a really, really nice, clever way of not just succeed or fail, but add extra storyline to what's going on.
Yeah, that's so cool. I have very limited experience with RPGs, but just from the little that I do know, that sounds really, really clever. I'm glad you brought this one up. And we are definitely a Star Wars household here. So I don't know if this is, I'm assuming you can't get this anymore, this Star Wars RPG?
I'm not sure. I mean, Fantasy Flight Games have been through a lot of changes over the last few years with what they still can do and what they can't do. I mean, sure, you can probably buy it somewhere, but whether it's still being printed, I don't know.
This.
Yeah, we're very much a Star Wars household as well. And just going back to the thing that I was talking about of where I've been today, we've got onto the subject of what readings are there going to be at the wedding? And of course, Vicky wants something that's, nice and romantic and meaningful and this, that, and the other. Yeah. And I was thinking about which section from the Star Wars film can we actually read out at the wedding? And it sounds like a thing. And she was like, don't be silly. And I was like, well, no. Do you not remember the bit where Han Solo's getting frozen in carbonite? It's one of the most romantic things in the film ever. So, I've been considering shoehorning quotes from Star Wars films somehow into the wedding.
I love that.
I think I can get away with it.
That's great. That is great. So my number 5 game that the first one I'll mention is a game I actually questioned if I was going to put on the list, only because when I was originally thinking of this list, I'm thinking of what are you using mostly standard dice for to do interesting things with? But I was like, how do I not mention Dice Realms, which is a 2022 release designed by Tom Lehman, and it's published by Rio Grande Games, and it's for 2 to 4 players. And the hook with this game is that it uses customizable dice with faces that you can pop out and you can upgrade your dice. So I kind of think of it as a dice building game, similar to a deck building game is with cards. So most of the gameplay is simultaneous. Players are going to be rolling their dice, and whoever the start player is, they'll roll a fate die as well, which is going to have some event that'll impact all players. But then you use the results of your dice, and everybody's doing this at the same time, to get points, grain, coins, and then you can spend your coins to buy upgraded die faces for your dice. And there's a whole lot of, again, when you're playing a deck building game, choosing what cards you want to buy to make your deck special. There's a whole lot of that going on with you're getting to be creative with how you upgrade your dice throughout the game. And then some of the die faces allow you to attack other players. So there's some player interaction there, and then there's some that'll let you defend, and you can get reroll tokens to kind of let you mitigate some of the luck factor. And then I don't own the game, but I know it comes with a bunch of different tiles, so you can kind of vary it up almost again if you're playing something like Dominion with a bunch of expansions and you're changing the cards you're playing with from game to game. this works in a similar fashion. And it's I think I played it about 3 times. It plays pretty fast. And I just find it to be like really innovative and clever, even though it doesn't use standard like D6 dice per se. But that is Dice Realms. Have you played that one? I
haven't, but when you started talking about customizable dice where you change the faces, I was like, well, I'm sure you're right that it's called Dice Realms, but the one that springs to mind for me is Dice Forge.
Oh, yeah, I've never played Dice Forge.
Which I was just looking up on a website that you may have heard of called Board Game Geek. Dice Forge, I know that one. 2017. So I obviously they are different games, but Dice Forge is the one that I know that used that.
Does customizable dice.
So.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I've heard of that game. I've never played it, but I'll have to check that out and see, how they compare.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you mentioned Dice Forge or Dice Realms, whichever, because that method of, we'll just pop the dice out. I've actually got a Lego game. So years and years ago, Lego actually made a few games, and I've got one called Shave the Sheep, and it actually has these customizable dice where you can change the results, but that's not part of the game. You're supposed to build the dice at the start, and then you just use it. There's no rules within the game for changing it, but it had these quite nice Lego dice that you popped the faces off and swapped them over.
That sounds cool.
My next game, released in 2019, this is Crystal Palace. So designed by Carsten Lauber, published by Feuerlandspieler. Capstone Games did the US distribution for it. There's a list of other publishers as well. 2 to 5 player game set at the time of the first World Fair in London. Different nations are showing off their inventions to try and get the support of famous people. Now, using dice as workers is nothing new. But in this game, you actually, at the start of each round, all players take their dice behind their screen and set them to whatever value they want. You don't roll these dice. You actually choose what they are. Now, the higher dice are better, because then when you start placing the dice on the board, the higher dice get to go first, and certain worker placement spots require dice of certain values. So why don't you just put 3 6s? Well, when you reveal your screen, you then have to pay 1 money for every pip. And that's it. That it's so simple that you play this game and you think, why did nobody think of this beforehand? Because one of the big things with dice, as we sort of mentioned about right at the start, is this randomness. So in order for a Euro game to use dice correctly, it has to either make the better dice more expensive, like in this, and like I mentioned, Pulsar 2849, or make the dice so that the good ones are, every value is useful or something like this. So yeah, Crystal Palace does that. And it's that moment. I mean, the sign of a good Euro game for me is 4 players sat there staring at something in silence for at least 2 minutes. And that's what happens at the start of every round of Crystal Palace. Everybody's there going, well, I want to put 6 6 6, but I don't have the money. So maybe I'll put 3 4 6. Oh, I've got to put a 6 because otherwise, and then you reveal it, you pay the cost, and you're like, oh, they've done this and they've done that. It's just brilliant. I mean, the rest of the game is you then go around the table, you place your dice on the spaces, and then you do the actions based on where you go. But it's just that design decision at the start, which is just brilliant.
And I only played Crystal Palace once a while ago, probably right after it came out. When you go after you reveal and you go and place your dice, is it a game where like multiple workers can be on the same place, but the person who put the higher one gets to do it or something like that?
Exactly right. So if I go, right, I'm going to go there, I'm going to do this action, and I'm going to use my 4, and then you go there with your 5, your 5 is going to get to do the action before my 4 and take the thing that I wanted. And then I'm like, why didn't I pick a 5?
Right. Cool. Yeah, I enjoyed Crystal Palace. I think when I played it, it's always interesting, like sometimes when you play a game at the same time when you're playing other games and it kind of like got overshadowed. But I remember like I was hoping the theme would pop a little more and it didn't pop for me. So I was kind of like, But I did always find that part of it was really, really cool and really interesting. And oddly enough, it's kind of in the same vein as the next game I'm going to mention. which is Coimbra. And Coimbra is a 2018 release designed by Virginio Gigli and Flaminia Brassini, which is 2/3 of the design team behind Lorenzo and Magnifico, which you brought up, is another great dice game. It's published by Spiel, and it's for 2 to 4 players, and it's basically a Euro game that's set in the Age of Discovery in 15th and 16th century Coimbra, which is a city in Portugal. The theme doesn't really matter too much in this game. But you have 4 main color dice. You have purple, orange, gray, and green. And then there's a white die, which is kind of wild. It can be any of those things. And the different colored dice correspond to 4 different tracks, which are kind of like the like driving a lot of what you're doing in the game. These 4 tracks on the game board, the main game board. And each round, one player, whoever the, I guess, start player is going to like roll all the dice. And then players take turns drafting 1 die at a time and placing a die in one of these rows on the left side of the game board, where you're basically trying to bid for the initiative to take one of these cards that are available in each of these card rows. And then there's like another space at the top of the board, like a castle space. I don't remember what that does because it's been a while since I played this game. But basically, the higher the die value that you place in a row, the earlier you'll get to pick a card. But you have to pay for the card based on the value of the die that you place. So you're the first person to place a 6 in one row. You'll get first dibs on the card, you know, a card of your choice, but you're going to pay 6 for it. And the cards themselves either have, I think, a coin cost or a cost of guards that you'll need to spend, which is another resource in the game. And then if you're tied, let's say we both put a 4, whoever places the 4 first is going to get to pick a card first. So there's a whole like timing of when you're drafting a die, which one you're placing where in relation to the other dice that other players might place. And you're kind of like thinking about that. But the other thing is, after you place your dice and get your cards and everything and pay for them, the 3 dice that you end up drafting for the round, you will then use to activate these tracks. So when you get the cards from the first step I was just telling you about, a lot of them will have you bumping up one of these different tracks depending on the color of the card. And they all represent something in the game. Like some of them will be like end game scoring. Some of them give you an immediate effect. But I'm pretty sure they all give you, like if I get a purple card, it means I'm going to bump up like a certain amount of spaces on the purple track. So then, you know, you're gradually bumping up these different tracks. But the color of the 3 dice that you drafted for the round are going to dictate which of the tracks you get to activate. So one track is going to give you guards, which is a resource in the game. So depending on how far you're up that track, you'll get a certain amount of guards resources when you're activating that track. One track gives you money. So again, depending on how far up the track, like maybe I'm at the spot where I can get 3 money if I activate this track. You know, another track gives you points. And then another one lets you move your little pilgrim on this map that's another part of the board. And you're moving your pilgrim around the map, I think, to kind of claim some benefits at different locations on the map. I don't remember exactly how that part goes. But it's just the interesting thing is how your decision space when you're number 1 figuring out which die you want to draft value-wise so that you can afford to pay for whatever card you're hoping to get. The order in which you get them so that like if you really want first dibs on something, like you might want to take a high die and place it in a card row first so that you will hopefully get the card that you want. But then you're also thinking about the color of the die so that you know which track you're going to be, the tracks you're going to be able to activate to get other stuff that you might need. So this was a game that like I played back in 2018, I think at the first game convention where I actually like made game friends, and I loved it. And I bought it, but then I never played it. So I ended up selling it. And now that I'm like remembering how it works, I kind of want to get it again and play it again. But yeah, that's Coimbra. So it's another one where yes, you have an advantage to placing higher dice, but you're also going to be spending more resources to activate those dice. And I like that it integrates using, you know, the value of the die matters. where you place it on the board matters, and also what color the die is matters. So yeah, so that's Coimbra.
This was very, very likely to be on my top 5 list, but you got in there before me. It's a brilliant game. And you touched on this right at the start. Theme is irrelevant. I mean, we could have an entire other podcast discussion about great Euro games which actually have absolutely no theme whatsoever. So you're right. The theme of the game is Age of Discovery and 50, whatever. I play games for the mechanics and to see how good it is. And mechanically, this is an extremely solid game. And yeah, you're moving your pilgrim around the board to move on to tiles that give you bonuses, that give you icons that allow you to move up the tracks. There's no thematic explanation for it, but it doesn't matter. Every year I have to cycle out 50 to 75 games from my collection just because there's that many games coming in each time and I have to let one go. I can't see Coimbra leaving my collection in the next 5 or 10 years. I haven't played it for a while, but the times I have played it, it is very, very good.
Yeah, and I think it was a mistake for me to let this one go, so I might need to pick it up again. Even though I'm also trying to cull regularly. Anyways, that is Coimbra. What's the next game on your list, Paul?
So the next one on my list is one which arguably this should not be in my top 5, but neither of us had it. Or you didn't have this on your list, so I thought I've got to mention this. And this is Ganz schön clever, or That's So Clever, to give it its English name. So this was released in 2018, designed by Wolfgang Warsch, published originally by Schmidt-Spiele. Stronghold Games did the US distribution of it. This was nominated for the Kennerspiel des Jahres in 2018. It's had 3 sequels, of which I've played one of the sequels. I haven't played any of the other ones. And I was actually quite late to the party with this one. So when this game came out and everybody was raving about it, I mean, it was being played everywhere. It's not usually this game is not really in my wheelhouse. But then I discovered it a few years ago, and it turns out there's an online version that I can play on a website, an official one. So 200 games later, so I have played this game a lot, mainly solo. I've probably only played it maybe 2 or 3 times multiplayer, but it is very, very clever. Now, 2018, so this is 5 years ago now, but and this rolling dice and then choosing which ones to use, it's been adopted by many other games and moved on. It follows a similar system of I'm going to roll 6 dice at the start of each round. The 6 dice are different colors. And then I'm going to choose one of them. I'm going to do something with it, and then I'll re-roll the rest of them. Now, that isn't new, but in this game, whenever you choose a die and do something with it, you lose all dice of a lower value. So it gives you, you roll the dice and you're like, oh, well, there's the blue 5. I really want a blue 5. But if I do it, I'm going to lose, all of those. So you've got these really interesting decisions to make every single time you choose a dice. Now, that's the solo rules. But when you're playing multiplayer, what happens is one player is taking their turn. They roll all of the dice. Okay, I'm going to choose that one. Right, I'll take that one away. I'll do something with that one. Maybe I'll lose one of the other dice as well. Okay, now I'm going to re-roll the 4 that I've got left. I'm going to choose that one. I'll take that one. I'll put it over there. Oh, and I've lost another dice as well. So I've now re-rolled the last 2. I'm going to do that one. And then the other dice goes over there. The 3 dice that you didn't use go in the center of the table. And now all other players get to choose one of those dice. So you're doing stuff with the dice that the active player didn't choose to use. And I think it's not so much for me just the way that the dice are used, but it's the fact that this game, I think, is responsible for spawning a whole other genre of similar games that have come out after this. So I think it's one of those important games in our history of games that have come out. And it's dice. You can get really lucky. You can get really unlucky. As I say, I've played it 200 times on the app. And sometimes you can go, I just didn't roll the dice I needed. But the fact that it's a quick game just makes you want to keep going back for more and, trying it again and seeing. And even though that it has a lot of dice rolling, I found, certainly after playing it more and more and more, my average score was going up. I was getting better. And then I reached a point where I think for about 2 weeks, I think I played the game like 40 times. And in all of those games, I was scoring around 220 to 230. I was always scoring the same amount, no matter what happened.
Wow.
But I felt it deserved certainly a mention for what it's done for the hobby.
Totally. Yeah, I forgot all about Ganz schön clever. I'm not the biggest roll and write fan, but like this one was played a lot. Like I used to own this. I think I played the second one they did in the series, and I never played the third one. But I'm just not a huge roll and write fanatic, but I thought I played this game a lot and really, really love it. And yes, the clever is in the name, so I'm really glad you brought it up. Ganz schön clever, or That's So Clever, I think is the English, right? Yeah. The next game on my list was a very popular game for people who love medium to slightly heavy Euro games. Last year was Tiletum, which is a board and dice game that came out 2022. And it's designed by Daniela Tascini and Simone Luciani, which, many of us know as the designer duo behind Tzolk'in and Voyages of Marco Polo. Bangers. And Tiletum is, even though I think I don't know if I mentioned it on the podcast or in a BGG News article, but I'm not a big fan of the theme, but it has some nostalgia to it. Like, it definitely felt like a more classic Euro, because in the game, 1 to 4 players take on the roles of rich merchants traveling throughout Europe during the golden age of the Renaissance. And you're going to be gathering resources, fulfilling contracts, and competing for points at these different fairs that are on the map. But it was a game, like, thematically, that I was like, we couldn't have done something a little more interesting. Like, it's safe. It's like, people who've been playing these Euro games for a while are like, yeah, this feels right at home, But anyway, this game is centered around a dice drafting action selection mechanism where the dice have a dual function. So on the top left corner of the board, there's this little action wheel that'll be there. And at the start of each round, you're going to take a number of these resource dice, but based on the player count. And you're pulling them from this sack, so you don't know exactly which ones are going to come out. You roll them, and then you distribute them around the action wheel according to their number. And so there are a total of 20 different dice in 5 colors, and they correspond to the 5 different types of resources in the game. Gold or yellow dice, food or pink, wool is light gray, stone is dark gray, and iron is a bluish gray. And yes, I just said a bunch of gray, and these colors are kind of hard to differentiate between in the game. But the neat thing in this game is that on your turn, you're going to take a die from around this action wheel, and depending on the value of the die, you will gain a corresponding number of resources. So if I take a 2 pink die, I'm going to get 2 food. But then the amount of action points I get is the difference between that and 7, that number and 7. So if I take a 2 die, a 2 pink, and I get 2 food resources, then I get 5 action points of whatever action is at that particular spot of the action wheel at the time, which rotates from round to round. And I think that's really neat, because besides the fact that there are all these like bonus tokens that you'll want to try to snag around this action wheel, you're constantly thinking about like, oh, well, that die is great because I really need a lot of those resources to kind of fulfill this particular contract. But then I'm only going to get 2 action points to do, that particular action. Maybe I should do this thing, which is going to give me 5 action points. I can move around the map a lot. Oh, but I'm only going to get 2 wool, and I already have 10 wool. Who needs wool? So it's a really, like, I love the game. I think it has, it's like one of those games where you want everything and you want to do everything, and you can't really plan because usually everybody else wants those same things. And, so you have to kind of wait to see what's available during your turn. But I like the way they have this action selection wheel with the different colored dice, and the dice correspond, the value of the die and the color of the die corresponds to the resources you'll gain on your turn. But depending on where it is around this action wheel and what the number is, that's how many action points you will get. So that is why I put Tiletum on this list.
I mean, what we've described there is the very definition of the input randomness. So at the start of the round, you grab the dice, you roll them, and then you put them around that rondel into the appropriate sectors. And then everybody drafts the dice and chooses them. And it's those, they've got the balance right. And as you say, the key number is 7. So you're like, okay, well, I'm going to take 3 wool, and then I get 4 action points to spend on that action. Or I could take 6 stone, but then I only get to do 1 action point. You're absolutely bang on with the theme. The theme is like, oh, it's another dry, boring Euro where we're in Europe a few hundred years ago, and stuff like this. It works for the game. The theme for me with this one is mostly irrelevant. Again, it's mechanically, it's a very, very solid game. Apparently, the pronunciation is Tiletum. Tiletum, because it's Latin, apparently.
Tiletum.
That's what I got told. But when the game came out, we had a lot of good discussions about how we should pronounce it. And my partner suggested Tiletum, which sounds a little bit like one of the Teletubbies. So we actually started calling it Tiletum, just as a joke. Tiletum. But yeah, so cracking game.
Well, speaking of T games that are hard to pronounce, what's the next game on your list?
And to be fair, most of the games in the T series are the very definition of clever use of dice. So we've talked about Tiletum.
We could have said
Tabanusi. Yeah. We could have said Tekhenu. There's a whole bunch of these games, and most of them do use dice in clever ways. The one that I've chosen, and about 10 minutes before we started, I was almost going to change this one. So I've chosen Teotihuacan, but I almost replaced it for Tekhenu, because as I've been thinking about it, although I love Teotihuacan, and it's probably my favorite one of the T series, I think the dice are probably used in a more clever way in Tekhenu. But the reason why I didn't switch it is we had 10 minutes to go. I had to tidy the house, and I realized I don't remember enough about Tekhenu to be able to talk about it. So there we go. Teotihuacan, originally released in 2018, originally published by NSKN. Now, NSKN and Board and Dice have joined forces and has been now rebranded Board and Dice. So Board and Dice are the publishers of the new deluxe edition, which has recently been on crowdfunding. So designed by Daniele Tascini, who has been mentioned before today already. David Turtsey did the solo mode for this, and I think David was involved in some of the expansions for it as well. 1 to 4 players. It uses dice as workers, again, but you don't roll these dice. These dice basically move around the board, and whenever you use one of these dice as a worker to perform an action, they increase in value by 1 pip, and that represents the fact that the worker is getting more experienced or getting older or anything like that. And, of course, the more experienced somebody is, they do a better job. So the value of the dice means that the action that they're going to perform it's stronger. But the twist in this game is that when a dice gets to 6, they ascend. So they basically die, I think. They die. Yeah. You get a bonus for doing
nice
it.
Way of saying that.
And then, you get a new worker of value 1. And you start the process again. Now, I have to give a mention to a game that first used that mechanism called Praetor. Praetor is not a big popular game, but I think it was the game that first had this dice are workers that increase in value when you use them, and when they get to 6, they die and things like that. And Teotihuacan, again, I hope somebody corrects me if I'm wrong on this, but Teotihuacan used that mechanism. So some people have suggested I shouldn't be talking about Teotihuacan now. I should actually be talking about Praetor, which was also published, I think, by NSKN Games, because Praetor was the one that originally used that mechanism.
I didn't know that.
But yeah, Teotihuacan, as I say, it's my favorite one of the T games. And because I've recently covered it on the channel, because Board and Dice have launched this new, deluxe edition master set with everything in there, I had the chance to go back to it again in a similar way that I've gone back to Princes of Florence recently. And I went back to it, and all of my love for the game just came back again. And I'm now playing it regularly on Board Game Arena. So very good game.
Awesome. Yeah, this is one that I was thinking about putting on my list too, but we were trying to avoid crossovers because I think it's a great example. And this is also, that like 2018 was the year that I got into modern board games. So this was, just as I'm starting to play heavier games, like this game was really special. And I remember being so excited and intimidated by that massive board and thinking this game is so great. It's definitely like one of my favorite tea games as well. And I also thought about Tekhenu, and I was trying to remember exactly how it worked because I remember liking Tekhenu a lot when I initially played it. I just haven't played that one in a while. But yeah, Teotihuacan. It's something I need to revisit soon too. So my next game is another tea game that might be hard to pronounce by some people, not Board and Dice, but it's Troyes, or what looks like Troyes to many people, but it's French. So Troyes is an older Euro from 2010, designed by Sebastian Desjardins, Xavier Georges, and Alain Orban, and it's published by Pearl Games. Plays 1 to 4 players. And in this game, we're all like representing these different families and we're recreating 4 centuries of history of Troyes, which is this famous city in the Champagne region of France. Throughout the game, or at the beginning of the game, players take turns putting these different workers on spaces on the board, and depending on how many workers you have on these different building spaces, you'll be able to that'll dictate your dice pool for the round. So there's like a military area, a civil area, and a religious area. And the way it works is like if I have 2 of my workers in all 3 areas, as an example, I would get 2 red dice for the workers in the military area, 2 yellow dice for the workers in the civil area, and 2 white dice for the workers that I have assigned to the religious area. Then after you build your pool of dice for the round, everyone rolls their dice and you put them on your segment of the courtyard pie. There's like a kind of rondel area where each player will have an area where they'll place their dice for the round. And the number you roll kind of determines the effectiveness of your workers that round. So usually the higher dice are a little bit better. But then you're going to take turns using your dice in different ways. And one of the ways you can use them is to bump players out of spaces on these building areas, which are going to be, that's the way you're building your dice pool every round. So it's like, oh, all of a sudden I'm going to knock Paul out of the military area. So now he's not getting any red dice next round and I'm going to get 4 now or something. You can contribute to building the cathedral, and there's some rewards to helping out with that. And I think penalties if you don't do that, or for the players who do the worst at that. There are also these different profession or like kind of career cards that are revealed on the board gradually. And there are a bunch of them that you can play with, but each game you're only going to play with, I think, 3 of each type. So there's lots of variety and you don't know exactly which ones are going to get revealed throughout the game, but you can spend dice to place workers there. And that gives you kind of like a special way that you can then going forward use dice to do some cool thing, which is really neat. They're also like an event card every round that gets flipped, and like players have to kind of deal with the event, and you use military dice to kind of fight battles and all sorts of things. But money is kind of important in this game, and one of the reasons is because you can pay opponents to use their dice. And that means, like, let's say Paul has 2 red 6s or something, and he hasn't taken his turn yet, and I have 4 coins. I could say, I think it's just like 2 coins per die. I don't remember exactly how much you pay. But anyway, I could pay Paul to then take his dice, and I will instead use those dice on my turn, which is really interesting, like create some real fun player interaction for those who are into that. There are also like options for manipulating your dice. So there's an influence track. You'll be trying to like gain influence throughout the game. And you can spend influence to re-roll a die or flip one of your dice over to the other side. So there are ways to kind of like mitigate the result of your roll and everything. But I just love the interaction between the dice and the different event cards and those like profession cards that are out there that you can go and kind of place one of your workers on. And then you have this special way that you can now use your dice, and also just like vying for control in the buildings that dictate how many dice that will make up your dice pool and everything. And I haven't played this one in a while, but initially when I made my first set of board game friends and I started hosting this little meetup at Three Weavers Brewery. At some point, like we initially were like playing Great Western Trail every week to kick off the game night. But then we pivoted to Trois, and we were playing Trois a lot. And I just like fell in love with this game. And then at some point we switched to Terra Mystica, but I fell in love with Trois, and it's something that has never left my collection since then. So I guess that was like 2018 I picked this up. And and it's like just thinking about it and kind of revisiting it a little bit makes me just want to bring it out to the table and play it again soon. So I'm probably gonna do that.
That's the problem, isn't it? When we talk about these games, the last thing I want to do tonight is go and not play games. It's like, these games are so good, and when you're both passionate about the hobby like we are, even just talking about them makes us want to play them again. Now, I have a story about this game. So I can be classed sometimes as a shallow person, and I've played this game a couple of times, and I don't like the artwork. And I'm in the minority. I am really in the minority in this game. And the artwork of the game is not bad at all. The artwork of the game is very thematic. It is deliberately done to match the theme and the style of the time. And I just don't like it. So that put me off the game. But mechanically, it is a very, very strong game. And this is another game that got mentioned a number of times by people on the Facebook groups that I posted about this. Now, I will give a shout out to Black Angel, because Black Angel, by the same designers, by the same publisher, is effectively a re-implementation of Trois that uses very, very similar mechanisms, but with E&O tool artwork. And it's set in space, and it's got these really cute little plastic robots that are really cute. Now, when I've played Black Angel probably about 6 or 7 times, I really enjoyed Black Angel. Okay. I actually can't remember how similar it is. I don't think it's just the same game with a reskin. I think there are some differences, but it basically is, as I say, it's by the same designers, and it's sort of a, it is a re-implementation, but I don't know if it's an exact copy. I don't think it is.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who love this, and I know some who were kind of, lukewarm on it, but it's one that I've never played, Black Angel, and I want to try it at some point, especially if I'm going to revisit Trois soon. It'll be cool to try to play them back to back, and see what the differences are from the same
Once you've done that,
team.
Give me a shout. Let me know. Because I'm curious to know what you think about the difference between the two.
I will. All right, one more game to mention.
One more game to mention.
What's your last game?
So I didn't have a hard time in deciding which one I should talk about last. This is actually my favorite solo game of all time. This is Under Falling Skies. Designed by Thomas Hulier from Czech Games Edition, released in 2020. I think Under Falling Skies is an absolute genius of a game. The player count is 1. It is a solo game only. However, I quite often play solo games with 2 people. Now, I started doing this a while ago. And I've actually done a number of live streams on my channel which were advertised as solo playthroughs with 2 people. And nobody else seems to do this. But I don't go to the cinema on my own. I don't go for a walk on the beach on my own. I like to do things with other people. And considering as I'm getting older, my brain is starting to stop working, and I'm in the middle of a game and I'm like, where am I up to? What's going on? What game is this? Doing games with another person, the playing a solo game with another person, I absolutely love the experience. We sit there together, we talk about what we're going to do, we make those decisions, we have those discussions, and then we decide what to do. So, yeah, and Under Falling Skies is a game which I personally firmly believe is best played with two people. But it is a solo game. And basically, aliens are attacking Earth. It's basically Independence Day, the board game, and it's up to you to save the planet. And you've got your player board, you've got the board, which is a long, thin board divided into 5 columns. And these alien ships are coming down these columns, and when they get to the bottom, they deal your base of damage, and then they go back to the top.
Bad stuff.
But the way that the dice working in this game is you've got 5 dice, 3 grey, 2 white. At the start of each round, you roll those 5 dice, and then you have to assign those dice onto the rooms within your base with certain restrictions. And it's those restrictions which make the game what it is. So I mentioned that there's 5 columns and there's 5 dice. You must assign 1 dice to each column. So suddenly, and your base is multi-layered. So suddenly you're thinking, oh, well, I want to use that room there. But if I use that room there, I can't then put another dice in this column at all. But the other thing is, and we talked about this earlier on, that it isn't a new mechanism where I'm going to roll the dice, I'm going to choose one, I'm going to re-roll what's left. That is not new. But in this game, and again, it's just a slight twist to that, you only re-roll your other dice if you place a white dice. So I mentioned you've got 2 white and you've got 3 grey. So you roll the dice and you look at the dice and you're like, right, there's a 6 grey there. I want to place that 6 grey, but the other 2 grey ones, I don't want them at all. But I definitely want the 6 grey. I've also got a white 2 and a white 4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place the 6 grey, so that's done. Placing a grey dice does not cause a reroll. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to place the 4 white, and that causes a reroll of all of the rest of your dice. So you have choice over when those rerolls happen. And it just gives you such a bigger decision space.
Cool.
Now, the other thing as well is the way that this game handles, well, surely high dice are just better, is every single time you place a dice in a column, all of the little alien ships in that column move towards you a number of spaces equal to the value of the dice. So there you go. You put your 6 in the column, you put the 6 in the power room to generate you 6 power, and the aliens in that column move 6 spaces towards you. And you are sat there playing this game, making so many little micro decisions that all add up and are all important. And it's a puzzle. The game is a puzzle with the input randomness, but with a high level of skill. So even though it's got all of this randomness coming in, what you choose to do with things is very much skill-based. Now, it's got the dice, and there are a few times that I've played this game where the game has gone absolutely down to the wire, and on the last round of the game, you're like, if I roll a 5, I win the game. If I don't roll a 5, I don't win the game. You know, any game with dice, you're going to have that. Now, one other thing that I wanted to mention about this game is it was first originally entered into a contest that runs, well, I don't know if it still runs. It might still run, where basically designers create a game using only 9 cards. So 9 cards and a few extra components. And this game entered a contest and it won. This was like 2 years before it was released. So the game was already out there as a print and play version on the aforementioned website, Board Game Geek. And I think it still has an entry on Board Game Geek as Under Falling Skies brackets 9-card print and play version. And it won the award. So it was already a known game that was already really good. But then when CGE decided to pick it up and publish it, is they didn't just publish that game. They actually turned it into one of, in my opinion, and this is without any bias, because I used to work with CGE a lot, the most value for money game in the size of box that it is. The game was relatively cheap in a relatively small box, and it's absolutely packed full of stuff. Not just physical stuff, but the content of the game. The replayability is through the roof, because you've got so many different base configurations, and you've got all sorts of different things. They did a campaign. They did a whole campaign with all of these extra stuff that gets revealed as you play it. And it's all in this little small box. Unfortunately, for Under Falling Skies, it got released at the same year as another game from CG, which was massively popular. So Under Falling Skies went a little bit under the radar.
Under the radar.
But very good game. And I just love playing it.
I'm really glad you brought this up because this is another game like Coimbra that Coimbra I had played. I picked up Under Falling Skies because I love playing games solo, and I read the rules. I set it up one day, and then I didn't get a chance to play it, put it away. And then on one of my like culling missions, I was like, I have too many solo games. I sold it, and I'm regretting it, and I'm going to rebuy this one because you just got me really excited. And I remember thinking it was cool, but again, you just got me like really excited to revisit this one, and I definitely regret selling it. So, I'm gonna have to.
So, can I tell you a little bit of
that sounded awesome?
A little bit of a story about this game, which I wasn't going to talk about, but I think I will. So during lockdown, obviously, we were all stuck at home. I used that opportunity to carry on making videos and carry on doing live streams, but I was doing them remotely. I was doing Under Falling Skies, and this was part of the sort of the promotion of the game before it came out with CG. But what I did is I did a number of remote playthroughs of the game where I would be talking to people around the world. I would have my camera set up. And I would be talking to them using some kind of, Skype or Discord or something else. And I would be sharing with them my screen so that they could see. This was going out as a live stream on YouTube, but the people playing the game were, they were watching it without any delay whatsoever. And basically, I was teaching people how to play the game, and they were telling me what to do. And I was moving all of the pieces around. And I've done a number of these on the channel, but one of them that I did is one of the charities which I support regularly is the Chrysalis Youth Empowerment Network, which has been running for a few years, and it does great work, and it empowers, I don't want to use the word kids, but youths, young adults in Uganda, and it trains them up to become, and these are people who've had, difficult backgrounds, or they're, no families or things like that, and it trains them up to become leaders and things like this. And one of the organizers of it is a board gamer, and board gaming is a big part of what they do. And I remember when I first found out about this, I was like, oh yeah, kids over, in Africa playing games. So it's probably going to be, Monopoly, Clue. And then I saw pictures of the games that they were playing, right? So it was Twilight Imperium. It was Great Western Trail.
Wow.
And I'm like, hang on a minute. These are like 13, 14-year-old kids. And they were there, and they were like, okay,
That's
so
awesome.
you guys are hardcore gamers. Anyway, I got the opportunity, and this is getting back to the story.
Cool.
I got the opportunity to do a live stream with two of them that were in the project. And they were over there in Uganda. They managed to get their internet working. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was here, and I taught them how to play. And they played the game, and it was one of I'm trying not to get all emotional about this, because it was one of the most rewarding things that I've ever done, is that I got the chance to play this, to teach them this game, and they played it. Now, when you're doing live streams and there are moments of silence, it's always a bit, what am I gonna do? Yeah. And the fact that two of them were playing it, and every time I rolled the dice and I said, right, okay, so you've got a 3, 4, and a 5, and the white dice are a 1 and a 6. And they could see this because we were connected over Skype. They could see this. And then all I could hear was them whispering to each other, or they were talking to each other. And they were doing this for ages. And it was like maybe 2 minutes. And I was like, well, and I was trying to keep the stream going by. And then they were like, right, we're going to do that there. And it was one of the best games that I've ever seen. And it was one of the closest games that we've ever seen. And it was all looking really bad. And the alien mothership was about to, and they turned it around. And they turned it around because they were so clever, and they were really thinking about it. And it was just, it was one of the most memorable live streams that I've done.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing.
I'll send you the link later on. It was a few years ago.
Yes.
But it was, it was just a really good game of it.
That's awesome. And you're right. Like, that's a great idea about like playing solo games with other people, because I remember, was it last year at Gen Con, I think it was, I did I was demoing Haplomachus Victorum, and two of us were there. Casey from Brains in the Jar, Games in the Jar. I forget exactly her handle, but Casey and I were playing Haplomachus Victorum. We're learning and playing it together, and it was like, this is so fun. We're interacting together. It feels like a cooperative experience, but just bouncing ideas off each other and just enjoying the game together. So I am totally a fan of that as well. But that's a really cool story. So Under Falling Skies, great pick. And so my last pick, I've talked about on this podcast before. It's one of my favorite games. And this is another one that Paul and I kind of wrestled over. So we'll both kind of chime in and talk about it a bit. But it is Too Many Bones. So Too Many Bones is a chip theory game designed by Josh and Adam Carlson. Came out in 2017. Plays with 1 to 4 players. It's a solo or cooperative adventure game where you're playing as a gearlock, and you are basically, what are they called? Like a dice RPG or
dice
something?
Dice building RPG,
kind of like
I think they call it.
Dice building RPG. Yeah, you are basically each playing as a different character, and each character has their own way that they function, and it's based on this set of different skill dice. And, throughout, there are so many different types of gearlocks you can play in this game. And they all have like very thematic abilities with their skill dice. But you also have dice that you use for like regular, like health, attack, defense, dexterity, moving around the board and everything. Gilly is one of the ones that I loved very early on, because he can play traps, and then he has these arrows, these multi-use arrows that can fire at these baddies in different directions. But on your player board for this game, you have different paths which you can kind of skill up your different gearlocks. And so even if you play the same gearlock over and over for a while, you can kind of make them work a little differently depending on the skill dice you choose to use for them. And it also has a cool thing where, you'll roll your skill dice each battle, and then you can like lock some of them in. I forget, what is it called, where you kind of lock them in and then you can cache some of those dice in. Yeah,
you just put them in your active area on your character map.
Yeah. But the thing I'm thinking of is in the top of your player board. Yeah. I forget.
Well, there's the active area, there's the locked area, but are you thinking of the bones track?
Yes, right. Yeah. I think I'm thinking of the bones track, where you can you get a certain amount of them and then you trigger some other ability. But what's just really cool with how inventive they got with, all these different types of characters, and then the different dice and how they relate to them. Stanza is a bard, and she has a lutar instrument, and she can play songs, and you're doing different things with these dice to help her write songs. And then you have Duster has a pet wolf that can interact with the baddies, and but I love a lot of chip theory games, actually. But Too Many Bones for me is it's another great one to play 2-player or solo. And I just think it's very, very clever with how they made this game and these different characters that are centered around this variety of different types of skill dice.
Well, Chip Theory Games are one of my favorite publishers. Josh and Adam Carlson as designers. There are few people that are as creative as them. And this is not just Too Many Bones, but there are other games as well. The amount of creativity that goes into their games is scary. Too Many Bones is Chip Theory Games' flagship product. They've done some other great games, but Too Many Bones is the one that they're most well known for. I've played this game a whole bunch. I've probably done 20 live streams of this game on the channel over the last few years, and this was going to be number 2 on my list, but you grabbed it before me. But I'm happy we talked about it.
As long as we're talking about it,
because as you mentioned, this game doesn't use dice in just one way. It uses different dice for different things. Some of them are never rolled. And I'm thinking of is it Boomer with the grenades? Which one of the dice is basically how many grenades do you have? So that's a dice that you never roll. Right. It's just got the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on it, and you use it to track. It's a counter die, how many you've got. And there are other dice that you do roll when you use them. And the bones thing that we mentioned is really clever, because a bones is bad. A bones is like, okay, you've rolled this dice and you've got the bones, which means you didn't get the cool thing. But every time you roll the bones, you put it on your bones track, and then the more that gets. Yeah. And if you manage to get 6, then your character effectively levels up, which is a once per game thing, and they become more powerful. Cool. So the core game has a very, very creative use for the dice. But I think what makes Too Many Bones shine is, as you touched on, every single gear lock is unique and it works in a very different way. And when you look at some of the dice, the different faces on the particular dice, so each dice can actually cause 2 or 3 different effects. It's so detailed, and there's so many different characters that you can play in it. It's just a great experience playing it. Really, 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 really cool. Yeah. It seems like we have very similar tastes. It does. Which is awesome, but it's also bad because you're going to influence me to buy more games. Oops. It's bad and it's good, but it's good overall. It's good overall. Awesome. Well, Paul, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today. I'm glad we got to do this. I hope I get to bump into you when we're in Essen together later this year. But yeah, it's great to talk to you again. I have been, watching your channel since I got into this hobby, and you always crush it. And again, we have similar tastes, so you like great games, and it's just a pleasure to talk to you. Yeah, it's been really good, and we'll arrange to meet up at Essen, because I think we saw each other across a crowded room at Essen last year and kind of waved at each other. And I was rushing somewhere. Yes, but we can make a point of meeting up this year. I'm going to actually be working for Board and Dice this year at Essen, demoing a new David Turtsey game that I'm not allowed to talk about yet. But I know that David Turtsey game. I have actually, the secret one. I'm very excited about that so
one.
I'm going to be doing demos of that in the mornings at the Board and Dice booth this year.
Well, I'll for sure see you, because I'm definitely going to come by that booth. Cool. So awesome. Well, thanks again, Paul.
Thanks for having me on.
You've been listening to the Board Game Geek Podcast, produced and edited by Candice Harris. Special thanks to Matt Fonda for editing and mixing our music. Be sure to visit us on the web at BoardGameGeek.com. You can also find us on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Twitch under Board Game Geek. You can reach us by email at podcast@BoardGameGeek.com. Thanks for listening, and happy gaming!